Good morning, Rachel, Mike Nolan. Welcome again, brother. JB, appreciate you. Hopefully you're stationary now. It is definitely the Kentucky Derby edition of Coffee with the Black Guy. F.S.I.M, first Saturday in May. Welcome, Walt. Welcome, Aaliyah. Welcome, Kaya. Pleasure. Let's just play a little bit of copyright approved music here while we get started and wait for some folks to come in. What's going on, Mike, down in Oxnard? What's good? Dynamo TV, welcome. Just playing a little bit of copyright-free music that we can play right here. So welcome, Ernest. We've got some great things to talk about today. Not going to waste a whole lot of time here because we got a lot to talk about, I think, but we'll see how that all goes. A few more minutes, we'll let a few more folks jump up in here. We'll get to talking about the F.S.I.M edition, the Run for the Roses. Did some good research, and it should be very interesting. Cool. We got 11 Brett Corbin to be in your live video. Yeah, you know what? Let's jump in here with Brett real quickly as we get started. Oh shoot! Yeah, I invited you. Be cool.
What's up, man?
Happy Derby.
Happy Derby. I'm here too.
Indeed. Hey, what's going on, Samantha?
We're just chilling before we head over.
What's that?
We're just chilling before we head over to my parents' house. They're having a little backyard party.
Nice. Hopefully they can join and check this out here in a little bit.
Yes.
We talk about some good stuff here. But yeah, I think I'm about to get started. I don't want to waste too much time. There's a lot of stuff to get into, man.
Yeah, definitely. Loving the post.
Yeah.
We will. We'll give you a call when we're back down there.
Okay, sounds good, man. Appreciate you.
All right.
Later. Okay, so yeah, let's go ahead and get this conversation started. Yeah, that was Brett Corbin. That's the reason I go to the Derby. But good morning. All right, so we've done. Welcome. I think we want to just go ahead and get started with today's conversation. As you can see in the background here, we've got some Kentucky Derby memorabilia, and of course, always a Tribe Called Quest Midnight Marauders. But a few things I want to touch on before as we get started here. As we were reminded last week with Dr. Milo Dotson, who joined us, we have May. We're in the second day of May now, and May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So I think it's important to point that out, given the topic that we had last week and what we're doing this week. And just a quick little recap on kind of what Coffee with a Black Guy is all about. And then also how I got started going to the Derby, and then we'll start getting into the little bit of the history and stuff of that nature as well. But I wanted to make sure that we appropriately launch this thing off and mention that this would be a conversation that's dedicated to some folks who've been important in my connection with the Derby and going horse racing and such. But the first being, and you'll catch this at the end, hopefully, as I tie it all together. But the first would be my paternal grandmother, Mary Elizabeth Brooks, right here. Born in 1929 and just passed away at the end of February 2020. And so we're dedicating part of today's conversation to Mary, my grandma Mary. And then also two folks that have been very instrumental in the beauty of the Kentucky Derby experience that I've had over the past several years. That would be both Janice Murphy and Frank Bonarigo. And, you know, let's throw in Dan Cook in there too, because he's a good man. And used to be known as the Bloody Mary man. But all except for Dan, we lost the past couple of weeks. Unfortunately, or past couple of months, unfortunately. And so wanted to go ahead and dedicate this show to them. So without any further delay, what is Coffee with the Black Guy? Coffee with the Black Guy is just a conversation, right? It's I started it off as an opportunity for folks to be able to engage in cross-cultural conversations in a way that is developmental, building, and connecting within our communities. Started that in 2016. I've been doing a lot of conversations. I think we've counted close to 20 conversations, specifically just around issues of race, and you know, have grown in the engagement as well as the number of people attending events. And so just wanted to share a little bit of background about that. I mean, it came from the idea of wanting to be judged by who we are instead of the uniform that we wear. The skin is my sin idea. And so sharing our experiences, sharing our perspective, so more folks can understand your neighbor, your fellow neighbor, simple as that. And so before any of this Coffee with the Black Guy stuff happened, I started off, once I graduated college, I started off as a cub reporter in a city called Marion, Indiana. Marion, Indiana is known for the last lynching in the North. I think it was 1930, 1932, something along those lines. Where there was a lynching in the town square. One of the alleged victims, or one of the victims of the lynching incident, happened to break free. That was James Cameron, and that was the first job I out of college. I was in that town as a pretty much a general assignment reporter, and in that town. Working in the newsroom, a paper called the Chronicle Tribune, I shared a cubicle wall with this guy that came in for his interview with his initials embroidered on his shirt. Things you remember. But I ended up sharing a cubicle wall with Brett Corbett. And, you know, we would, you know, you're in the cubicles and you're sharing stories and talking about things and enjoying life, supposedly. And doing the job. Oh yeah, there's that too. And so Brett used to always talk about Derby this, Derby that, and I didn't know what he was talking about it. So finally, I gave him an opportunity. Well, he gave me an opportunity to go to the Derby because he was like, you keep asking about the Derby, and you've never been. You come one time with me and you'll never ask about it again. And that was 2003. And as you may have seen in some of the stuff that I posted this morning, I've been probably about a dozen times since 2003. I think that's what, 17 or so years. Gee. Oh, and if you're wondering, yes, it is the Kentucky Derby. And I don't know. And I'm sitting here sipping on coffee, right? Well, couldn't let a day pass without a good old mint julep. So here is my Kentucky Derby mint julep in my Derby glass that has all the winners from the first winner back in 1875, Aristides. We'll get back on that too. But here's cheers to a morning mint julep. Tasty. All right. Cool. So you heard a little bit about how I got started going to the Derby, right? And so, you know, Brett invited me, and I think that, like I said, it was 2003. Now this year, it's the Derby is supposed to be today. It's normally on the first Saturday in May, which is why we have the first Saturday in May. F.S.I.M. CWABG, called the Black We're having this conversation around the issues and history of the Kentucky Derby. Right? This year is supposed to be the 146th running of the Kentucky Derby, and being that they haven't the COVID-19 situation, we postponed, or I'm part of the Derby, part of Churchill Downs. They postponed the Derby until September 5th, 2020, and I hope to be in attendance then if we are able to. What is this Derby business all about? It's the Great American Party, it's just one of those things that for me, it's kind of been like Christmas, my birthday, New Year's, all wrapped in one. You just kind of get to go, let loose, have fun, feeling good, good vibes, and looking good too. Yeah, we usually dress up. And this is a little pre-Derby attire here today. So you heard the call of the post earlier. That's the bugle bump. Well, that happens a few minutes before the post. And let me tell you a little bit about Derby Day. It starts off the day before Derby. It's Oaks Day. That's when the fillies run. Everybody wears pink. Good times, festive at the track. Just meandering, roaming, being around folks, putting a little bit of money on races here and there, and just having a good time. And then on Derby Day, we wake up, you start your libations early in the morning when you're with the Derby, the Derby crew, which is the Corbin crew. You get, you get your drink on around 9:30, 10 o'clock with a Bloody Mary at the Bloody Mary stop, and then we keep going on till we get to the track. There's several races throughout the day. I think it might be like I don't know, maybe 15 races throughout the day, spaced out, time in between. And so you're watching racing throughout the day, but the Kentucky Derby is a specific race, and it is known as the fastest 2 minutes in sports, or the most exciting 2 minutes in sports, because it's about how long it takes for the horses to get around the track. And so I want to make sure that you understand a little bit about what the Derby is and the running. And so right before, a couple minutes before they load up into the post for the Derby race, you hear the bugle call, the call to the post, and then everybody gets sentimental, right? There's this thing, everybody sings the Kentucky state song, and it's known as My Old Kentucky Home. And I'm not going to play it here because I definitely think that there's some copyright issues that I ran into last time. So I wanted to make sure that I didn't run into that again. But My Old Kentucky Home, right before the actual Derby races ran, everybody sang. There's some photos on my feed where you can see people having a good time, and there's a lot of emotion, and it's a song with soul, emotion, and passion, right? And it was composed by a guy by the name of Stephen Foster. The original name of My Old Kentucky Home, which is the Kentucky state song, the equivalent of Maryland, My Maryland, and we'll get back to that as well. That's a Maryland state. And so the original title of My Old Kentucky Home was Poor Uncle Tom, Good Night. Poor Uncle Tom, Good Night. Did you know that? I've been singing that song since 2003, and I did not know this history. So I did not go to the Derby this year on the first Saturday in May, decided to host this and then do some research and come and find out that everything is connected to Black people. Have a great day. So Stephen Foster wrote this Poor Uncle Tom, Good Night in 1855. 1854. In 1855, there was a guy by the name, this abolitionist by the name of Frederick Douglass, who wrote in his autobiography then about that song. And in his writing about that song, he says that Poor Uncle Tom, Good Night, which is now My Old Kentucky Home, is awakened sympathies for the slave, in which anti-slavery principles took root, grow, and flourish. Frederick Douglass wrote about the Kentucky state song in the early years of this song's existence, 1855. that this song awakens sympathies for the slave, in which anti-slavery principles take root, grow, and flourish. The song was inspired by Uncle Tom's Cabin, which had come out in, what was that, 1852. That a book came out in 1852, and so that there's a bit about that song, and it's written. It's got a kind of a mix between being sad and being merry, being both smiles and cries. That's what I'm talking about as far as the emotion about this song. The first verse has been sung at the Kentucky Derby right before the race every year since about 1921, somewhere between 1921 and 1930. Yeah, I did some research on this, right? And so there's some dispute in history back then, of course, that it became the Kentucky state song in 1928. And except for a year in 1986, the song stayed the same. But in 1986, a group of Japanese students went to the Kentucky General Assembly to sing this song to the lawmakers in Kentucky, and the words of the song made some of the lawmakers feel uncomfortable. So they asked and demanded that the song, that word, be changed out of the Kentucky State song. This is 86. That this word be taken out of the Kentucky State song and replaced with another word. So let me real quickly here pull up the words to My Old Kentucky Home, and I'll explain to you which words were changed, right? Oh yeah, and just for context, so this song became the Kentucky State Anthem in 1928. My grandmother, as I mentioned, who this is dedicated to, was born in 1929, October 29. And so just, it's not that far ago, not that disconnected. So let's see here. That's not the original word, or those are the original. So let's see lyrics. Let's see what the words are now. So when the sun shines bright on my old Kentucky, 'tis summer, the people are gay, meaning happy. So in 1986, before this Japanese youth group went to sing at the General Assembly in Kentucky, the words for My Old Kentucky Home were, oh, when the sun shines bright in the old Kentucky home, 'tis summer, the darkies are gay. Yep, said the darkies are gay, meaning happy. But again, a slavery, anti-slavery type sentiment to this ballad. And again, in 1986, it was changed from darkies to people. I think in the the brochures and pamphlets for the Derby, I think they say folks, old folks are gay. And so that terminology has changed over the years, which has indeed taken away, ripped apart the history with this song and the history of what this song means from the people who sing it adamantly and so heartfelt every year, and sometimes several times a year. And so that was very interesting to me. That, well, damn. Yeah, well, damn. Another interesting fact, in late 1920, a guy by the name of Paul Robeson recorded a version of My Old Kentucky Home in London. And so that is the history, a little bit of a snapshot of the history of My Old Kentucky Home. I always encourage you, as I'm saying this stuff, if you don't believe me and or you're just like, you know what, that sounds interesting, I want to check it out, go do research. There's a lot of information out there. And so I just wanted to go ahead and make sure that you knew that. Yeah, you knew that? Now I know that. One thing here is, as my coffee mug is getting empty, my team has been adamant about encouraging me to, it takes money to make this thing run. It does indeed. And so as this gets empty, there's a virtual tip cup. Yeah, you go to the web page and there's links to the Cash App and the Venmo or Cash App and PayPal, one or the other. But there's ways for you to donate to our cause, and or if you just want to buy a mug. We're selling those on the web page, and they're $20. But it supports the whole edition and movement. Those who put your orders in, they'll be coming soon. So yeah, now that we know a little bit about my old Kentucky home, let's talk about a little bit more of the Kentucky Derby history, right? Yes, notes, James, you took notes, yes. Kentucky Derby history. So the Kentucky Derby is ran on the first Saturday in May, mostly, but it's the only the longest running uninterrupted sports event in America, right? So it's been running consecutively, uninterrupted since 1875. So if we're not able to have it in September, September 5th, when they've rescheduled it, that will be the first time it's not happened since 1875 in 146 years. So that means that they still had the Kentucky Derby through the Great Depression, through both World Wars. And so, something I learned when I was in college going through some things, put context on the content, right? And some of you have heard me talk about that idea or that concept before. But the Kentucky Derby started in 1875. What was going on in America in 1875, right? So I used that and started to think about, like, okay, so what are some of the other things that were going on? Well, the history of the Kentucky Derby, there was a grandson of this guy by the name of William Clark. William Clark was of the Lewis and Clark expedition, folks. His grandson of his name was Meriwether Lewis Clark Jr. He traveled to England in 1872. When he went to England, he specifically stopped and visited this place called Epsom in Surrey, England. Every year in Surrey, in Epsom, they have held an annual horse race called the Derby since 1780, right? And so Meriwether Lewis Clark Jr. went over, enjoyed this thing in 1872. Remember, the first Derby was 1874. So 3 years before, he saw this, got inspired, spent some time in Europe, Paris, some other places. And when he came home, he organized something called the Louisville Jockey Club, which ended up becoming Churchill Downs. So the Jockey Club ended up naming the Churchill Downs property after the people who donated. The brothers John and Henry Churchill donated this property to the Jockey Club to become Churchill Downs, right? And so that was 1875. So the first Kentucky Derby was held on May 17th, 1875. And this is according to, if you want to check my research, the Kentucky Commission on Human Rights.gov. So in the first Kentucky Derby in 1875, May 17th, 3 years after Meriwether Lewis Clark Jr. went to England to learn about some things, this concept of the Derby. That first Derby, May 17th, 1875, was 10,000 people were in attendance. 10,000 people. And then, just like now, there were 3-year-old horses running in the race, right? 15 of them. 15 3-year-old horses in the first Kentucky Derby with jockeys mounted upon their backs. First winning horse of the Kentucky Derby, the history that's on the mug. This is a little rubbed out. This is a little older one. Aristides was the horse that won the first Kentucky Derby. Aristides was the name of the horse. Anybody want to know about who was on the horse's back? Guy by the name of Oliver Lewis. Oliver Lewis was the first winner of the Kentucky Derby. Oliver Lewis was 19 years when he won the Kentucky Derby. Oliver Lewis was black. upon Aristides. The trainer of Aristides was a guy by the name of Ansel Williams. He was a famous horse trainer, award-winning trainer. He was also black. So, in the early days of the Kentucky Derby, and again, this information is in Smithsonian, all of it, but in the early days of the Kentucky Derby, 15 of the first 28 Derby winning jockeys were black. 15 of the first 28. In those early years, 6 of the first 17 trainers were also black. Now think about this: 1875, and this little crunch of area when these things are happening. We're just getting out of slavery. 1865 is June. We celebrate Juneteenth, and so of course, when you think about it, like the slave owners, property owners, wealthy people who engaged in horse racing and the whole thing around that, they didn't actually engage in working the horses, feeding the horses, training the horses. Of course, there were indentured servants or enslaved individuals who did that up until a point, and then those individuals were somehow not quite sharecroppers, but they were paid pennies to take care of these horses and train them and things of that nature. And so, like I said, let's run this one more time. 15 of the first 28 winning Derby, 15 of the first 28 Derby winning jockeys were black. 6 of the first 17 winning trainers were black. And by the early 1900s, blacks had been pretty much pushed out of the sport because it was something for the wealthy or upper to middle class folks. So pretty much by 1921, black jockeys and trainers were pretty much wiped out of the scene of horse racing. And so that was pretty much the case through all of the 20th century up until the year 2000. And in 2000, this was 3 years before my first Derby. Wait, hold on. Did we just connect history from like all the way back in 1875 to 2000, 2003? Yep. And we're going to keep going too. Here we go. So by the early 1900s, a lot of the black jockeys and trainers were pushed out. In 2000, first black jockey reemerged in the Kentucky Derby. And there was a guy by the name of Martin St. Julian. In 2000, he ran he mounted a horse in the Kentucky Derby and ended up finishing 7th in that race in 2000. Again, Smithsonian is a source where you can get this information. Other sources and things like that. Google's a great one too. Now, the question is, how does this connect to my family history? Right? You're like, okay, so there's these Derby horses and all this kind of stuff. Like, what's going on? Oh, something else. My Lucky Derby wallet. I only use it on, for the Derby. Got my important cards in here. Twin Spires card. We don't use those anymore. But yes, this is the wallet I take to the Derby. Anyway, so back into the family history. My family history connection, things that I've just been learning about over the past year and a half. This is where the connection to my grandmother comes in, right? She passed February 25th of this year. And I was fortunate enough to head back to Maryland for the service. And that was right before we pretty much got locked down. And things kind of got real serious for the COVID-19 situation. Yeah, my family's from Annapolis, right? And some time ago, my dad had said something to me about the new CEO of Anne Arundel County, Anne Arundel County, Maryland, is the family where is the same family where his grandfather was a sharecropper. And I know my dad loves horses. We used to go horseback riding quite a bit when we were younger. He would take my sister and I. And he just always felt comfortable around horses, just doing his thing. And I just never thought much of it. Come find out, because they grew. Well, I knew he grew up on a farm on a ranch, but on this farm they of course breed horses, and you know, him and his brothers grew up like riding horses without saddles, grabbing them by the hair, jumping on the back, and just holding on. And these are the stories that my uncles was telling me uh, this past a couple months ago. And this property where my dad's grandfather, so my great grandfather, who was a sharecropper, was this area in Davidsonville, Maryland. And it was this a farm. It was a tobacco plantation. It was they raised horses, thoroughbreds generally. Interestingly enough, the winner of the first recorded formal horse race in colonial Maryland was a horse by the name of Dungannon. That was May 1743. Now, I'm having a lot more connection to history when I see myself reflected in history, right? Educators, this is something to think about. But why is this information and this story and the other side of history not taught to us? And we're just expected to learn the revisionist version of history, a whitewashed Eurocentric view of what happened. 1743, May 1743, a horse named Dungannon won the first recorded formal horse race in Maryland. Dungannon's owner was a tobacco planter and horse breeder by the name of George Hume Stewart. Stewart spelled Steuart. So Dungannon, owner of George Hume Stewart. Dungannon was not originally from that farm that Mr. Stewart had. Dungannon was imported from England to race against one of George Hume Stewart's rivals, biggest rival. Some guy by the name of Charles Carroll was his rival. Charles Carroll, look it up, signed the Declaration of Independence. So the connection that I'm making right now is the first horse to win a formal horse race in colonial Maryland in 1743 was owned by a guy by the name of George Hume Stewart, who was from Scotland, but also emigrated from Scotland to Annapolis area in, I think, 1721-ish. And so when he would live in two places. And then when he decided to bring his horse over to race against Charles Carroll and it won, they got this race thing called Annapolis Subscription Plate. And it was a silver bowl that is also known as the oldest piece of silver made in Maryland. Okay. So George Stewart, when he lived in Annapolis, lived on this 1,600-acre farm known as Doden Farm, D-O-D-E-N Farm. And, as they had the first race, racing became a thing for the elite, people with money, people who had influence and different things of that nature, became the social and political center of society. And so this first horse in Maryland beat Charles Carroll's horse. Again, Charles Carroll, founding father of the United States. Oh, and another side note, I grew up in a place called Westminster, Maryland. Westminster is in a county called Carroll County. Deeper than the Derby, y'all. It's deeper than the Derby. So Charles Carroll, he had a 10,000-acre estate in the Maryland area. And he was kind of a Federalist, known as a Federalist. And he had, on this 10,000-acre estate, he had about 1,000 slaves that he had. And this is documented history. This is a founding father of the United States, signer of the Declaration of Independence, that everybody, yes, okay. So one of the signers, many of the signers, own people that look like you and I. And so that's a thing, right? Right. So you talk about the founding fathers of our country. What's going on, Caden? Yes, this is educational for kids too. Caden might be 10, 11, or something like that. Welcome. Yes, I'm glad you're listening. Um, George Hume Stewart, again, Scottish physician and tobacco planter, was a loyalist politician. But both Charles Carroll and George Hume may have been from different political mindsets, but they agreed on something, and that was kind of like the American Colonization Society. They both believed in that slavery supposedly was immoral, although they had slaves. But they believed that slavery was immoral, and the institution of slavery should be deconstructed in a way that it would be on the property's owners to do it as it was most financially fit for them. But at the end of that dismantling of slavery, they believed that the Africans who had been enslaved should be returned to their motherland, Liberia, places, states like that in the motherland of Africa. And so that was a debate and some issues during that time. So then ended up George Hume Stewart ended up fleeing the United States, or the colony of Maryland at the time, around the American Revolution, because he couldn't sympathize with, or he couldn't lose loyalty to the king and the monarchy and things of that nature. And so he ended up going back to Scotland and stayed there to avoid, persecution or whatnot. But prior to him fleeing the States, again, he emigrated to Annapolis from Scotland in 1721. In 1743, Stewart purchased this property, the Doden, on Doden in the South River of Anne Arundel County on the Chesapeake Bay. Court records can tell you all about that stuff, right? So you go look at court records to find out about land transfers, even back in the 1700s. And so who else was entertained at this Doden farm in South River, Anne Arundel County on the Chesapeake Bay, but none other than George Washington. Why? Because George Washington, the founder or the first president of the United States, signer of the Declaration of Independence, all of that, was friends with George Hume Stewart because they were both members of the Maryland Jockey Club, the Maryland Jockey Club, right? So George Washington, when he would come up from D.C. to the Jockey Club meetings in Annapolis, he would stay with George Hume Stewart on that Doden farm property, and he'd stay there and be entertained. Mind you, this Doden farm is the same property that my dad mentioned that his grandfather was a sharecropper. Yeah, man, I don't know what to think about that, right? Just think about that. Like, there was a land transfer that I've been doing the research about. There was a land transfer back in the dates are kind of all coming together now. It's the 1800s, and there was this a nephew of the Stewart family inherited this property, the Doden farm, and in his inheriting of this Doden farm, I think it was 16 acres at the time. He also inherited 150 slaves. Now this is around mid to late 1800s, so this would be 18. I think it was 1842 or somewhere around there. I don't know the exact date right now, but long story short is there's not that far of a gap in actually knowing, like there's not that much far of a gap between my great grandfather being a sharecropper on this Doden farm and the Doden farm being owned by this Stewart / Pittman family. Now, all of that, I've been going to the Derby since 2003, enjoyed the horses, just did something spiritually for me. And then I recently uncovered this connection to a horse breeding farm that my dad grew up on. His mom raised him, the oldest son of hers, on that farm. Evidently, they lived in a house with 24 people on that farm, in that house. And the white family, the Stewart / Pittmans, lived in the big house up the road. So yeah, many of the early jockeys, many of the early trainers, and many of the early people who took care of horses in America were Black folks. Now think about that connection as well. The calm that you have to be able to communicate with a horse, to be able to train a horse, to be able to perfect that calm, to be able to perfect that process. There's something in that. There's absolutely something. And so I share that with you here. And as we start to close down here, we got about 15 minutes. And I'm going to try to motor through some of these questions that we have and some of the issues that you all brought up. Hopefully, my squad is back here working on the questions. Let's see. And I see if you can give Mr. Golden Smiles, Mike Rambo, if you can give Mr. Golden Smiles a question up there as well. Let me see. David asked, am I watching the Arkansas Derby today? Well, probably, yeah, because horse racing is about the only thing that you can get that's live right now, and racing largely without crowds. And so I've been watching Trackside Live on app Sling, and so on there you're able to check that. So I'll thank you, David. I wasn't aware the Arkansas Derby was going on today, but I'll flip it on and check it out. And so thank you for that. Isaac, do I think they'd run the Derby without the crowds? So I had hoped that's what they would do this year, just because knowing the history about it, it's the longest uninterrupted sporting event in America since 1875. And so I had hoped that they would do that. But if they're doing it in September, I sure hope they have a crowd, right? Because I want to be there. It's maybe at the front of this, you heard some of the things that I had shared about this being my happy place. Being a happy place, and how the Kentucky Derby is the first leg of the Triple Crown. So that basically launches off horse racing season, more or less, that I start to tune in. And so there's the Kentucky Derby the first Saturday in May, and then 2 to 3 weeks later, there's the Preakness, which is held in Baltimore, Maryland. So let's connect that. Maryland. Pimlico was first owned by the Maryland Jockey Club, whose founders were George Washington and George Hume Stewart. Like, connected all back together. It's very, very interesting. Anyway, so Pimlico Preakness held at Pimlico is the second leg of the Triple Crown, and the third leg is at Belmont Stakes in New York. And so if this will mess up that process, definitely. But I definitely hope, Isaac, if they have the event in September 5th, as it's planned currently, that they do have crowds for selfish reasons. If they end up running it without crowds, I'll still enjoy it and participate in any way that I'm able to. But I definitely think by September, I will need something like a good visit to my old Kentucky home with my Corbin Derby family and extended. So, there's that. And so, Mike, Mr. Golden Smiles, he is in Maryland. Went to high school with me. He's 1 or 2 years younger, but he evidently used to deliver flowers to Pimlico for the Preakness. Black-eyed Susan is the Maryland state flower. So here's the thing about the flowers. So then they gave the winner of the Preakness a blanket of the Black-eyed Susans, but when the Derby, it's a blanket of roses. So you're picking up blankets if you're winning races in the Triple Crown. But Mike's talking about delivering there. Never been to Pimlico or Preakness or heard about that. I grew up in Maryland, and I remember my mom used to get her haircut by this lady, Miss Ruth, who had her beauty shop in her home, and her front porch looked at the back side, the back side of Pimlico racetrack. And so when my mom would go to get her hair did, I would be there, and she'd take me with her, and I would get to see the Preakness, or not the Preakness, the Pimlico racetrack from the beginning. And in fact, and I didn't even plan it. In fact, my first job for my first internship. When I was first internship when I was in college, was at the Baltimore Business Journal. I was still living around the summer, and the first week I was at the Baltimore Business Journal, we had a company outing. It was like summer and da 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 da, and the Baltimore Business Journal had a company outing with the newsroom, and all the reporters and even the intern got invited to this outing, and they had something called the BBJ Classic, Baltimore Business Journal Classic. And see, that's me in the winner's circle in 2001, 2001, the summer of 2001, I think that is. Yes, in the winner's circle with, and my mentor at the Baltimore Business Journal was a guy by the name of Keith Reed, and he's not pictured here for some reason. I don't know why, but shout out to Keith in KT in Pennsylvania, out there doing a thing. Great dude. We ended up on the NABJ together, and they even room. But yeah, so there's always been some sort of weird connection to horse racing, and even back to the early years. And so it's just been in my blood. Something I always enjoyed and didn't know it until Brett says, "Come to the Derby one year. You'll never ask that question again." Yeah. Okay. So we covered quite a bit here, and we've got about 10 minutes left. Any other questions? Any other issues, Derby or non-Derby related? In fact, there were some questions that came in because I had questions. I asked a question on my Instagram stories, and so Brett asked, "Do I have any betting tips?" Do I have any betting tips? Betting tips. Yeah, bet on the horses that Cock does not pick. Dennis Cochran, whatever he picks, just pick the opposite. Those are my betting tips. A little inside joke. No, don't do that, because he's actually not done too bad over the past several years. But betting tips are just go with the feel. Like, there's no real science to it. You can look at the horse. You can say you like the color of the silk. You can say you like the name of the jockey. You can say you like the trainer. You pay attention to the last performances of a horse and put money based on, well, which horse in this race performed best in previous races, right? Over this, like, how long can they run a certain length? And so it's kind of like the equivalent of a 40-meter dash for NFL players, but how long did a horse run, 3 furlongs, right? And that, in a sprint race and things like that. And so that gives you some indicators. Depends on the length of the race. It depends on a lot of things, but really there's a variety of ways. I've seen people have just as much success by following the handicapper's booklet as those who just pick the color of the silk. So don't overthink it. The race is only half the party. Just know that. If you ever get a chance, go to the Kentucky Derby. How come I go to Louisville and leave without a day in Cincinnati? Because if you know anything about the way the Corbins do Derby, there's no time to do anything but Derby. So I usually get in on a Thursday, get in Louisville. They live in Prospect. I usually get in on a Thursday, connect, go to either Brett's house, his parents' house. By the time we get to Friday morning, you pop up and your Derby experience is already starting, because that Thursday morning, the Derby crew, the Corbin crew, went to the backside of the track to get pictures and do all that kind of stuff. I've always missed that on Thursday. Maybe I'll make a point to hit that sometime. But then on Friday, we get up and go to the track. It's the Kentucky folks, a little bit turned down. I mentioned that's the day for the fillies to run. Everybody wears pink. It's breast cancer awareness, a lot of good vibes at the track that day. It's definitely less professional. That's where I think in 2005 on Oaks Day, I ran into a little guy by the name of O.J. Simpson that I actually didn't see until he looked at me like, "Who's this other black person in this area?" Because there's not many of us in that area of the track, but I connected with him in there, and I lost my track of where I was going. oh yeah, why don't I come to Cincinnati? And so sometimes I'll even fly in the Cincinnati airport, which is actually in northern Kentucky, and just depends on ease and when I'm able to get my flight. But last year I did try to make a stop in Cincinnati because after the Derby I drove back to Maryland. So I do recall hitting y'all up in Cincinnati and nobody was available, so I kept driving and stopped off in Athens. But it's all love. It's all love. Got love for Cincinnati. Indeed. Any other questions, thoughts, comments, concerns? Had a couple people request to join in. Hold on. Let's see if Brett is wants to get back in here real quickly as we wrap up and close out. But yeah, I mean, this was an interesting diatribe. Hey, there it is, my old Kentucky home.
Boy. Look at that. That's how we're spending Derby.
Hey, man, I missed it.
This is our little setup here.
We miss you.
Oh, wow.
Usually there's hundreds of people.
Nice.
Now,
This? Oh my God.
here's Mr. Derby himself.
Mr. Derby, Pops.
Hey, my man.
Happy Derby to you.
We're
Welcome.
making the best of a bad situation.
Hey, I heard that. That's all love, man. I miss you guys.
So there's a virtual reality horse race today on NBC. So
CC.
Hey,
Who
aw.
you got in that race?
Yeah, so I heard, are they running the Arkansas Derby today? Are they running the Arkansas Derby today?
You want to show him a bracelet from?
Jean Couga's bracelet.
He gave that to me.
I love it. So
It's
This
a
is
strange
probably one of
code, James. There you go.
if you're lucky enough to go to the Kentucky Derby, you're lucky enough.
No T-shirts this year.
None.
We
Come
might
back
make
next year. Come back next year,
My
James.
man James.
All love.
Shelley.
Where's your
Shelley.
bow tie? The wooden one. I love the wooden one.
We're relaxing today.
Seriously.
Shannon.
Hi!
Hey. Cheers.
But did you bet it like this?
But did you bet it like this, though?
No more of that.
So my sister asked, "What am I drinking on?" This is a
He's talking to you.
homemade mint julep with the official bourbon of the Kentucky Derby, Woodford Reserve.
That sounds good. We got some in the freezer here, so we're getting about ready to fire them up.
Nice. Very good. Very, very good. Well, look, I just want to let you know, like I had mentioned to you on the phone, that we, dedicated today's conversation to Janice Murphy, Frank Bonarico, Dan Cook. I'll throw him in there too, and then my grandmother, Mary Brooks. I don't know if you watched the whole conversation, but man, I was able to connect the founding of America, founding fathers of America, to my history with my family and my attendance at the Kentucky Derby. Very interesting stuff.
Thank you, James.
So sweet.
Thank you, James.
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate y'all. About to get up off here and see if anybody else has any more questions. Anybody else? Or y'all got any questions there? Something to talk about? Some issues?
All right, James. Have a good Saturday, buddy. We'll
Thank
talk to
you.
soon.
You too? All righty. Sounds good.
Take
Later.
care.
Cool. All right. So that was good to see my Corbin family and my old Kentucky home. Yeah, like I said, I'm going to wrap up, go downhill here. Any other questions? Can we talk about your drinking, please? The bourbon. Yes, again, the bourbon is Woodford Reserve. Woodford Reserve is the official bourbon of the Kentucky Derby. Bourbon can only be bourbon if it's made in Kentucky. My sister seems to think one day Uncle Nearest will make an impact, which if you don't know about Uncle Nearest, look that up. Uncle Nearest, Nearest. He is the original distiller who taught Jack Daniels how to do what he do. So Uncle Nearest is now a brand of whiskey And hopefully we can get that incorporated into the Derby here before long. So without any other questions, I appreciate you all indulging me today. Hello, Mother. Yes, a man of many hats. I've learned from the best. There are any other questions, I think this stuff will be up on the Instagram feed for a little bit. And y'all can always head over to the webpage, coffeewiththeblackguy.com and or CWABG.com. Mugs are on sale there. There's the webpage. Mugs are on sale there. You can learn more about the movement, figure out ways that you too can engage. So the ways that you too can engage in meaningful conversations about race, about issues, about history. I encourage you to think anytime when you're hearing about history, particularly these young folks that may watch this, whenever you're hearing about history, just think about that one question: what else was going on in America at that time, or what else was going on in the world at that time? It kind of puts context to anything that you're learning. And so when the first Derby was held in 1875, it wasn't until this year that I really had time to breathe and think about it. I'm always excited about either going to the Derby or acting out missing the Derby because of scheduling or whatnot. But ask yourself those questions. Continue to have good vibes. Talk to people. Make friends. Engage the other. Stay safe and COVID free. Appreciate y'all for joining. Again, if you are in here and you want to share this conversation with folks, please do so. And with that, I'm out.